Part 1. The town decided her guilt before she ever spoke, and once a small town makes up its mind, it rarely listens again. It started with looks, quick, sharp glances that slid away the moment she noticed them. Then came the whispers, soft at first, carried on the dry wind that rolled through Main Street. By the time she reached the courthouse steps, the whispers had grown teeth. Liar. Trouble. Looking for attention. Each word landed heavier than the last, pressing into her shoulders until she felt bent beneath them. She stood there alone, the sun high and merciless, dust clinging to the hem of her faded dress. Her hands trembled no matter how tightly she clasped them together. She had rehearsed the truth 100 times in her mind, but standing in front of that building, its white paint chipped, its windows clouded with years of judgment, her words felt small. Fragile. Easy to break. She lifted her eyes only once, and when she did, she saw the faces she had known her whole life turned cold and distant, as if she were a stranger who had wandered in from nowhere. Across the street, leaning against a weathered pickup truck, stood the rancher. His boots were caked with mud, his shirt darkened by sweat and work. He had come into town for feed, nothing more, nothing less. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his eyes, but he saw everything. He had seen it that night too, the moment no one else noticed, the moment that changed everything. He remembered the way she had frozen, the way fear had drained the color from her face. He remembered the other man's voice, calm and cruel, confident in his own untouchable place in the town. The rancher's jaw tightened as he watched her now. He could hear the accusations clearly, even from across the street. He knew how this would end if he stayed silent. He also knew what would happen if he didn't. In a town like this, truth was dangerous when it threatened the wrong people. The rancher had spent his whole life learning when to speak and when to keep his mouth shut. Silence had kept him alive through droughts, debts, and years when the ranch barely broke even. Silence had protected his land, his reputation, the thin respect he had earned by not stirring trouble. She stepped forward, opening her mouth to speak, but her voice faltered. Someone laughed, not loud, but sharp enough to cut. Her shoulders stiffened, and for a moment, she looked like she might turn and run. The rancher felt something twist in his chest then, something he didn't have a name for. Guilt, maybe, or fear of seeing himself reflected in her helplessness. He shifted his weight, fingers curling against the side of his truck, fighting the urge to cross the street. The judge hadn't even arrived yet, but the verdict was already being passed. Heads shook, arms crossed. A woman she once shared coffee with wouldn't meet her eyes. A man she had trusted muttered under his breath and spat into the dirt. The town didn't need proof. It needed comfort, and blaming her was easier than facing what had really happened. The rancher told himself there would be another chance. Another day. He told himself someone else would speak up, someone with less to lose. He told himself that one voice wouldn't matter against so many already convinced. These lies settled easily in his mind, stacking neatly on top of one another until they almost sounded like reason. When she finally stepped back from the courthouse steps, her face pale and drawn, something in the air shifted. The whispers grew louder, bolder, as if her silence confirmed everything they wanted to believe. She walked past the rancher without looking at him, her eyes fixed on the ground, her back straight in a way that spoke of pride barely holding together. He watched her go, dust rising around her shoes, and felt the weight of his silence settle like a stone in his gut. The town called her a liar, and he let them. As he climbed into his truck and drove away, he told himself he had done nothing. But deep down, he knew the truth had already begun to cost them both, long before a single word was spoken. Part 2. Weeks passed, but the town did not move on. It never really did. It simply found new ways to repeat the same story until it felt permanent. She stopped coming into town after that day. No more quiet walks past the feed store, no more sitting alone at the back of the cafe. Some said she had left. Others claimed she was hiding because guilt finally caught up with her. Each version sounded the same in the end. She was the problem, and the town was at peace again. The rancher heard it all, even when he tried not to listen. At the feed store, men leaned close and shook their heads, speaking with the satisfaction of certainty. At the bar, laughter followed her name like a punchline. He never joined in, but he never stopped it either. He paid for his supplies, tipped his hat, and left. That silence, once familiar and safe, now followed him home like a shadow he couldn't outrun. Out on the ranch, the land looked the same as it always had, wide, unforgiving, honest in a way people rarely were. He fixed fences under the blistering sun, the wire biting into his palms. He fed cattle at dawn, their low calls cutting through the quiet. Work had always been his refuge, the place where thoughts dissolved into routine. But now, no matter how hard he worked, his mind kept circling back to that night. He saw it in fragments. The dim light, the sudden tension in the air. Her voice, small but steady, saying no. He remembered how he had frozen, how instinct told him to step back instead of forward. He told himself it wasn't his place, that getting involved would only make things worse. Yet the memory never stayed still. It grew sharper with time, replaying itself in moments he couldn't control, while tightening a bolt, while washing his hands, while lying awake in the dark. At night, sleep came in short, broken stretches. He dreamed of standing on that same street, watching her walk away again and again, each time smaller, more distant, until she vanished completely. He woke with his heart racing, the room thick with silence. The old house creaked around him, filled with the ghosts of choices made and not made. He sat at the edge of the bed, boots still dusty by the door, wondering when silence had stopped being protection and started becoming a sentence. The town's approval still existed, but it felt hollow now. People greeted him the same way they always had, with nods and brief smiles. They trusted him, respected him. That respect tasted bitter. He realized it was built partly on the fact that he hadn't spoken, that he was smart enough to stay out of it. Each friendly word felt like another brick laid on top of his chest. One afternoon, he saw her again from a distance. She was standing near the edge of town, loading a few boxes into the back of an old car. Her movements were careful, almost restrained, as if she were afraid of being noticed. He slowed his truck but didn't stop. Fear rose in him, not of her, but of what stopping might demand. As he drove past, their eyes met for a fraction of a second. There was no accusation in her gaze. No anger, just exhaustion. That was worse. Something shifted after that. The land no longer felt honest. The work no longer felt clean. He started snapping at small things, losing patience with animals, with tools, with himself. He avoided town when he could, taking longer routes, making excuses. But the truth had found a place inside him, and it refused to stay quiet. He began to understand that silence wasn't neutral, it wasn't harmless, it was a choice, one that protected lies as effectively as any spoken word. The realization terrified him. Speaking would cost him everything he had built. Not speaking was costing him something deeper, something he didn't know how to replace. As the weeks stretched on, the weight became unbearable. He knew the town would never change on its own. He knew she would carry the lie forever unless someone broke it open. And slowly, painfully, he accepted what he had been avoiding since the beginning. The truth wasn't done with him. It was waiting. Part 3. When the rancher finally spoke, it wasn't dramatic. There was no raised voice, no grand entrance, no speech prepared in advance. It happened on an ordinary morning, the kind that usually passed without leaving a mark. The courthouse was quieter this time, the benches half filled with people who believed the matter was long settled. They looked surprised when he stood. Some looked annoyed, others smiled, certain he was there to confirm what they already believed. His hands shook as he removed his hat. The room felt smaller than it had weeks before, heavy with expectation. For a moment, he almost sat back down. He could still walk away. He could still choose the version of himself the town preferred. But then he saw her, thinner, pale, sitting alone near the back. She didn't look at him. She didn't have hope left to give. So he spoke. He told them where he had been that night. What he had seen. What he had heard. He named the man everyone trusted, the man who had laughed afterward, certain his standing would protect him. Gasps rippled through the room. Anger followed fast. Someone shouted. Someone else called him a liar now. The word landed differently when it was aimed at him, heavier, sharper. He understood then what she had stood against alone. The truth didn't fall neatly into place. It crashed. The judge called for order. The man he accused stood up, face red with fury, denying everything. Friends of that man glared at the rancher with open hatred. Years of shared meals, handshakes, and favors turned to ash in minutes. But once spoken, the truth could not be pulled back. It hung in the air, undeniable in its weight. By sunset, the consequences began. His contracts were cancelled without explanation. Calls went unanswered. A supplier he had worked with for decades suddenly had nothing to sell him. That night, someone cut the fence along his south pasture, letting cattle scatter into the dark. Another night, his truck windshield was smashed. A note appeared on his porch, warning him to leave town while he still could. He didn't fight it. He worked quietly, gathering what cattle he could, repairing what damage he was able. Each loss stung, but it no longer surprised him. The town needed him to be the villain now. It needed balance restored, even if that balance was built on punishment. The land went next. Debt that had been manageable suddenly became urgent. Banks that once extended patience closed their doors. The ranch that had held his family's name for generations slipped from his hands piece by piece. Signing the final papers felt like cutting away a limb, but even then, he felt something unexpected beneath the grief, relief. The lie was no longer his to carry. On his last day, he loaded what little remained into his truck. The house stood empty behind him, stripped of its warmth, echoing with memories. As he turned onto the road, he saw her waiting near the edge of town. She looked stronger somehow, straighter, as if truth had given her back something essential. They didn't rush toward each other. They simply stood, separated by a few feet of dust and silence. She spoke first, her voice steady. "You didn't have to do that. I know," he said. She nodded, eyes shining but dry. There were no apologies exchanged, no gratitude spoken aloud. They both understood that words weren't enough to cover what had been lost, or what had been given back. As he drove away, the town shrinking behind him, the cost finally became clear. He had lost his land, his standing, his future as he once imagined it. But for the first time in months, his chest felt light. He could breathe without the weight of unspoken truth pressing him down. The town would remember him as the man who caused trouble. She would remember him as the man who finally told the truth. And for him, that was enough, because though the truth had cost him everything, it had also given him back himself.